Well, I think it makes, as a follower of Christ, it makes every kind of difference. The problem is that most people don't even know that they have a worldview. They don't move much beyond thinking about their own thinking, if we could say it that way. So if they don't know they have a worldview, they think that the way they think is the only way to think. And they don't understand why someone else is thinking some other way. But when you actively think and you intentionally think about how you see things, it helps you when you're looking at or listening to someone else talk and realize this is where they're coming from. And if I really want to communicate with that person, then I need to understand where they're coming from so I can speak their language, so to speak, and help them see what I'm seeing, or help them see my point of view. I think that's one of the most important things. Plus, it helps us live our lives in a certain way, because when we get some new piece of data, we then can hang it where it's supposed to be hung. We know this fits here. This fits in my belief section of my life, or this fits in this section of my life, and it helps us make sense of reality a little bit better. So I think that's an important part of it. Anytime you go into a new setting, you're going to meet people who have a different worldview. And so what happens there is that they're meeting people who have interpreted reality from a different perspective altogether. And they start to proclaim or explain their worldview and challenge your worldview. They may do it intentionally or unintentionally, but they're starting to make you question whether they're right or you're right. And then, if they know how to undermine your worldview, they can do that as well. One of the things that I do when I teach on worldview, an illustration that has helped me understand what's going on is, if you know what makes up a tree, that kind of sounds real simplistic. I've used this for years, that when you look at a tree, you normally see just what's above the ground. You see the trunk, the branches, and most of all the leaves. And to me, that's what's external in our larger picture of civilization, or what we call culture today. That that picture is what's above the ground. That's our culture out there. Well, what informs that? Well, the same thing when we look at what informs what feeds a tree. Well, it's the roots that feed the tree, and that's the way worldview is. Worldview is below the surface, and it's feeding everything above the surface. And we can change the shape of what's on top, but we really don't change the essence of it. It's when you start feeding the roots something differently, that's when worldview changes. And I think that's an important part of understanding how worldview works. And you can apply that to yourself, that my worldview really is what I think and what I believe about acting, about my faith system. But what you see outside me, that's really my personality. And really, that's what culture is. Culture is the personality of a civilization. That's why music and art and literature really express so much of a culture's personality. There's a lot of other things involved with civilization, like politics and government and education, science, and all of those things. But what really is affecting them is what's below the surface. What I understand are the real main pieces of worldview. Again, I try to simplify it. People have asked 6 questions or presented 6 questions that have to be asked on worldview. I've read some books that have 12 questions that should be asked on worldview. And all of those questions can be boiled down to 4 different categories. And they are ultimate reality, or from a Christian perspective, you would say God. Mankind, you'd have to ask the question about man, what is man? But that would also take into account things like morals and ethics, sexuality, those things would come in there. And then nature, or the universe. You know, what is this stuff we call the universe or nature outside of ourselves? And finally, truth. Those four things: ultimate reality or God, mankind, the universe or nature, and then truth. You've got to deal with those four concepts to deal with anything concerning worldview.